The suitcase sat in the corner, its leather cracked, edges worn smooth by time. The afternoon light spilled across it, catching the gold clasp that shimmered like it was daring me to open it. My hands were still trembling from what I'd just seen. His emails, her name, the life they'd built behind my back. The air in the room felt heavy, almost humming with betrayal. If you've ever discovered a truth that shattered your world, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Sometimes the people we trust most become the reason we break. I remember sitting on that floor, surrounded by pieces of a life that no longer felt like mine, staring at that suitcase like it was the last secret I could still control. That was the moment everything started to unravel. I remember the sound before I remember the feeling. Paper tearing, a door slamming, my name whispered through clenched teeth on a phone that wasn't mine. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty collapsed. My husband, Mark, and my best friend, Carolyn, gone. So was the house, the savings, even the business I built from scratch. They didn't just take money. They took the life I had built around them. That night, I sat in what used to be our living room, surrounded by silence that didn't feel empty. It felt accusing. Every photo frame, every piece of furniture reminded me how blind I'd been. The betrayal was sharp, but beneath it, there was something heavier, a realization that I had handed them the knife. And then I saw it. A battered brown suitcase tucked beneath the hallway table. It shouldn't have been there. My grandmother's handwriting was still visible on the luggage tag. Margaret Ellis, just like mine. She'd been gone for years, but touching that handle felt like she'd reached through time to steady me. I opened it slowly, half expecting dust, half expecting ghosts. Inside were letters, documents, and an old key taped to the lid. A note written in her careful script, for when everything falls apart. I didn't cry right away. I just stared at it, heart pounding, trying to understand how she could have known. In that moment, something shifted. The betrayal didn't vanish. It rooted itself deeper. But the pain wasn't the only thing growing there anymore. There was curiosity, a flicker of strength I hadn't felt in months. Maybe this was her final lesson. Maybe she'd left me the map to something I wasn't ready to face before. I didn't know it yet, but that suitcase would become my beginning. But before that night, my life looked perfect, at least. That's what I wanted to believe. Back then, my life in Ohio looked like something out of a postcard. Mornings started with the smell of coffee drifting through our kitchen window. Sunlight spilling across the counter as Mark read the paper and I planned the day. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where everyone waved, where weekends meant cookouts, laughter, and the kind of stillness that felt safe. Carolyn was always there, our closest friend, almost like family. She'd drop by unannounced with stories that filled the house with energy I didn't realize I'd grown dependent on. Looking back, I can see how much I mistook routine for happiness. We had our rituals, date nights at the same Italian place, movie marathons in winter, the same gifts exchanged every anniversary. I thought repetition meant security. Mark's absences for work trips never worried me. Carolyn's help with our accounts felt like kindness. Maybe I didn't want to see what those small things meant. There were moments, tiny, fleeting things, that should have told me the truth. The way conversations fell flat when I entered a room. The nervous glances they shared when I mentioned our future plans. But when you love someone, You learn to file away your doubts. You tell yourself peace is proof everything's fine. For a long time, I believed it. I believed the calm would last forever. Looking back now, I realize peace can be the quiet before the storm. It started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk, sorting through bills, when the phone rang. The bank asked if I had authorized a withdrawal that emptied our joint account. I laughed at first, certain it was some mistake. But as the woman on the other end listed the transactions, each one marked with my husband's name, the air in the room thickened. My hands went cold. I could barely hold the phone. I opened our online banking app, heart pounding, and stared at the numbers that weren't there. The savings account, the investment fund, even the emergency stash, gone. Each account locked, each balance drained. I felt suspended in silence, watching my life dissolve line by line on a glowing screen. For a few minutes, I convinced myself there had to be a reason, maybe a business issue, maybe a misunderstanding. But the deeper I looked, the more deliberate it seemed. Payments to unfamiliar accounts, transfers to a name I recognized only too well. Carolyn's. The first tear didn't fall until I checked my email. Bank notices, mortgage alerts. One final message confirming the sale of a property I didn't know we owned. His name was on every document. Mine wasn't. The world tilted. Every memory started replaying. His late nights, his distracted eyes, his insistence that I didn't need to worry about money. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. Love had blinded me, and trust had cost me everything. I walked through the house in a daze, touching furniture we'd chosen together, realizing none of it was really ours anymore. There was a heaviness inside me, like something had been ripped out, but underneath it, a strange calm began to form. The shock burned itself out, leaving only clarity. I looked around and saw what my life had become, a stage set for someone else's story. The tears stopped, the shaking stopped, and in their place, a quiet resolve took root. By the time I heard his car pull into the driveway, I already knew the truth, and I was done pretending not to. When I heard the sound of his keys at the door, my body went rigid. The rhythm of his footsteps was familiar, steady, casual, like nothing had changed. For a moment, I envied his ignorance. My world had fallen apart hours ago, and he was still walking into it like it was home. He smiled when he saw me. I remember how normal it looked, how practiced. I studied him in silence, every line of his face a map of the lies I had loved. My heart was pounding, but my voice, when it came, was calm, almost detached. I told him what I knew, not through accusation, but through truth stripped of emotion, the kind of truth that leaves no room for defense. He tried to explain, I think. Maybe he even believed his excuses. I only remember the sound of his voice, muffled, distant, like I was hearing it from the other side of glass. The words didn't matter anymore. The betrayal had already carved something permanent between us. I didn't cry. That surprised me most. For months, I had been drowning in denial. But now, standing in front of the man who had taken everything from me, I felt a strange peace. It was like grief had burned itself clean, leaving only clarity. I told him to leave, not out of anger, but out of necessity. watching him gather his things. I felt the weight of every shared memory collapse into silence. The doorframe seemed to hold its breath as he paused before walking out. When it finally closed, the echo lingered longer than it should have. I stood in that quiet, realizing that freedom doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like standing barefoot in the ashes, still warm from what burned. When the door finally shut behind him, the house felt empty, but for the first time, it was mine again. The house felt different after he left, like the walls were holding their breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. Every sound echoed, the clock ticking in the kitchen, the wind pressing against the window. I stood there for a long time, not moving, not crying, just listening to the quiet settle in like dust. When I finally started packing, it didn't feel real. I moved through each room like a stranger, touching things that once meant something. The wedding photos came down first, then the clothes, the little notes I'd tucked away, the gifts that had once made me feel loved. I folded everything neatly, almost reverently, as if I were burying pieces of myself. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, the car was full and the house was empty. I locked the door, slid the key under the mat, and walked away without looking back. The night air felt colder than I expected, sharp and clean. It carried the faintest sense of freedom, a fragile thing, but mine. I drove until the roads blurred. At some point, exhaustion took over and I stopped at a roadside motel. The kind with flickering lights and thin walls. I didn't care. I just needed somewhere to stop thinking. When I brought my bag inside, I noticed an old suitcase in the corner of the trunk. It wasn't mine. Brown leather, scuffed edges, the same one I'd seen years ago in my grandmother's attic. My breath caught. Somehow, through everything that had been taken, this had stayed. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my fingers over her faded initials. M. The same as mine. Something about it felt deliberate, like a message waiting to be found. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than pain. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the beginning of something I couldn't name. I didn't know it then, but that old suitcase was about to change everything I thought I'd lost. The suitcase sat on the small motel table, its leather worn smooth by time. I stared at it for what felt like hours before I finally unlatched the clasps. The sound was soft, but it echoed through the room like a heartbeat. Inside was the faint scent of lavender and paper, the smell of my childhood summers spent at my grandmother's house. On top lay an envelope with my name written in her handwriting, the loops familiar, gentle, certain. Beneath it, layers of carefully folded fabric, an old photograph of her standing in front of a brick building, and a small metal key tied with a red ribbon. My hands trembled as I lifted each piece, feeling like I was touching the past and being touched by it in return. The letter began simply, her voice almost audible in my head as I read. She wrote about love, about loss, about how strength sometimes skips a generation, but always finds its way back. She said she had seen how easily people could be deceived when they gave their whole heart to someone unworthy of it. She didn't name him, didn't need to. She told me she'd made preparations, just in case life ever tried to take more from you than you could bear. At the bottom of the suitcase was a folder. Documents, property deeds, a small trust account in my name. She had set it up years ago, quietly, knowing I might one day need a fresh start. She had known, somehow, that I'd need to remember who I came from. I sat there in the dim light, tears sliding down my face, not from grief this time, but from the strange comfort of being seen. It was as if she had reached across time to steady me. The woman who had taught me to stand tall had left me the means to do it again. I closed the letter and held it against my chest. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt guided, not lost. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled me. Her love had outlasted everything that had broken. By the time I folded that letter, I knew what I had to do next, and I knew exactly where to go. The flight to London felt unreal. Watching the clouds drift beneath me, I thought about how strange it was to be starting over in the same city my grandmother once called home. The fear that had once paralyzed me was still there, faint and familiar, but something stronger had taken its place. Curiosity. For the first time in months, I wasn't running from something. I was moving toward it. When I stepped out of Heathrow, the air was damp and cool, carrying that distinct mix of rain and history. London felt vast, but welcoming, as if it already knew who I was supposed to become. I followed the instructions in my grandmother's letter to a small law firm tucked away near Kensington. The receptionist led me to a quiet office where an older man greeted me with a knowing look. The kind that told me this moment had been planned long before I arrived. He handed me a folder embossed with my grandmother's name. Inside were legal documents transferring ownership of a trust fund, property deeds, and a letter of intent. But what struck me most wasn't the wealth, it was the purpose behind it. She had established a foundation years ago, designed to help women rebuild their lives after loss, deceit, or betrayal. Women like me. Her vision was clear: turn pain into strength, and strength into opportunity. I sat there, absorbing it all. Every dollar, every word was soaked in her love and foresight. She hadn't just left me money, she had left me a mission. It was as if she had known the exact moment I would need it, the exact day I would rediscover my worth. As I walked out of that office, the city around me seemed to shimmer with meaning. The traffic, the voices, the smell of fresh rain, it all felt alive, connected. My grandmother had built something that outlived her, something that now lived in me. I realized then that revenge didn't have to be loud or cruel. Sometimes it's rebuilding a life so strong that no one can ever take it from you again. That day in London, I didn't just inherit her fortune, I inherited her fight. It's strange how quickly life can rebuild itself once you stop clinging to what's broken. Months had passed since London, and I had begun to find my rhythm again. The mornings felt lighter. The silence no longer sounded like loss. It sounded like peace. My grandmother's foundation had become my compass. Through it, I learned that power isn't about taking something from others. It's about giving yourself back what they tried to steal. The first real step toward justice came quietly. I gathered the evidence I had: financial records, falsified transfers, messages I once ignored. Every piece told a story of deceit, and together they painted the truth. The attorneys handled the rest. There were no dramatic confrontations this time, no raised voices, Just facts, time, and accountability. When Mark's crimes came to light, I didn't feel triumph the way I once imagined. I felt release. The same man who had emptied my accounts and my heart now faced consequences, not because I destroyed him, but because I stopped protecting him. That realization changed everything. Justice wasn't fire. It was clarity. It was truth spoken without fear. Carolyn faded from my life long before the legal dust settled. I didn't chase closure with her. Some stories don't need an ending. They just stop mattering. What mattered now was what came after. With the inheritance, I built something new. A financial literacy and recovery program for women who had been blindsided by betrayal or loss. Watching them rebuild piece by piece reminded me of myself in that motel room, holding a suitcase full of hope I didn't yet understand. Each success felt like a small act of healing, not just for them, but for me. I sometimes wonder what my grandmother would think if she could see it all now. The offices full of laughter, the stories of women starting over. I think she'd smile that quiet smile of hers, proud, but never surprised. She always believed in second chances, even when I didn't. The pain that once defined me had transformed into something unrecognizable purpose. I no longer wanted revenge. I wanted growth, connection, and truth. It turned out the greatest revenge wasn't destruction. It was becoming everything they said I couldn't be. Some mornings, I sit by the window of my office, watching the sunlight spill over the city. The world feels quieter now, softer. I can almost hear my grandmother's voice in the stillness, reminding me that strength isn't born from what we keep. It's born from what we survive. When I look back on the woman I used to be, I see someone who believed love alone could hold everything together. I see her standing in the kitchen, making coffee, convincing herself the silence meant peace. And I wish I could tell her what I know now. That sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself again. The journey wasn't just about betrayal or rebuilding. It was about rediscovery, about remembering that power and worth aren't things others can give or take. They live inside you, waiting for the moment you finally stop hiding from them. My grandmother's gift wasn't money or property. It was a reminder that love, when passed down with purpose, becomes legacy. Through the foundation, I've met women who carry their own scars, each one a story of resilience. Some arrive broken, terrified of starting over, but slowly, they learn what I did. That healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about building something stronger from it. Watching them rise, seeing their laughter return. I understand now what my grandmother meant when she wrote that strength skips generations, but always comes home. The anger I once carried has turned into gratitude, the fear into quiet confidence. The life I thought ended has become the beginning of something far greater than I could have imagined. This story started with betrayal, but it ends with renewal. I've learned that even the deepest wounds can bloom into purpose if we let them. My grandmother's legacy lives in every woman who finds her footing again, in every life rebuilt from the ashes. And now, I carry that torch forward, not as a victim, but as proof that even in our darkest moments, we are capable of light. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the ashes? Share your story. I read everyone.